Hey, hey.
Hey everybody, hey Sam, hey Ed, just waiting on
Hey
Ian.
Wade.
And we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Let's just hang out as everybody trickles in. Hey Dollar.
How are you, Sam?
I'm good, Ed. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Just in our offices, it's fun.
Oh, you're in the office. Excellent.
Yeah,
Fantastic. We have
doing
a
my
we have a new Fidelia office right in the heart city of London, among the tall financial offices.
yeah. It feels good to be amongst the finance workers.
That's super exciting. I didn't know that you guys had an office. Congratulations. Wow, so cool. I'm really excited for today because, as many people know, hi everyone, my name's Wade. I'm the community manager at Outland, and I'm a huge fan. Prior to any involvement with Outland, of both your work, Ed, and Ian's work. So it's this is a super exciting space for me today. I'm honestly a little nervous, not gonna lie. um, yeah. How's everything going though? Like, it's been a couple weeks since, Familiar launched. I'd love to hear a couple, honestly, almost 2 months now. How's everything going? How's everybody feeling?
Yeah, it was it was quite extraordinary, the sale. And afterwards has been sort of like dealing with or just coming to terms with the scale of that and how successful we were, and then trying to plot the next steps forward, which we kind of already had in motion, but actually just getting on with the work, and also dreaming about the stage after that. I don't know. Sam, how's it been for you?
It's been excellent. As I say, it's been very exciting it's been very exciting to be part of the Fidelia project for the past year, and it really has been pretty much a year to possibly the day that we met for the first time, Ed. And since launch, it's been great. Been super fun working with the team. Been super fun getting an office. Uh, Finally working from somewhere that isn't my sofa for the first time in years. It's been good.
That's awesome. Hey, Ian, welcome. Cool. So everybody's here. I think I'm going to get started and give a quick introduction. Hi, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Wade, and I'm the community manager here at Outland. And we're here today with Ian Cheng and Ed Fornieles, who have recently released, along around the same time. I think the release dates were just about a week apart. Three Face and Familiar, both of which are adaptive NFTs that explore market conditions in different ways. Super excited to have everybody here, and also Sam Spike on the Familiar team, who has a lot of experience in the Web3 space, formerly with Fingerprints DAO and JPEG, among others. So cool. Thanks everyone again for being here today. And Ian, we were just checking in on just how we're feeling since the drop and since the release. How are you doing, and how have you've been settling in? About a month and a half post Three Face reveal.
Oh, hi. Yeah, happy to be here. Nice to hear from you, Sam and Ed. Thanks, Wade. Yeah, things are, I have two kids, and so a little bit of post-launch has been getting to spend a little bit more time with my kids, and then kind of charting out and planning some future pathways with how Three Face will evolve.
Absolutely. It's such an exciting project. I mean, I have been really excitedly but watching both the Familiar and the Three Face communities, seeing people get excited over the golden egg reveals, which are coming on the Familiar side, and people getting excited as they reach the third, fourth, fifth generation of Three Face updating, and their portrait has, totally changed. I think that to kick us off here, I want to talk. I first want to kind of give the audience a little bit of a vista into both projects, and I'll be pinning some tweets in just a couple minutes. But both of these projects create a different kind of portrait of NFT marketplaces in the crypto art ecosystem. In the case of Three Face, it's individual portraits based on wallet behavior and transaction history. And in the case of Familiar, it's the current state of a particular cryptocurrency's value. So I'd love to start with Ed, and then Ian, just talk a little bit about how these portraits work and why it was important to you to try to capture these insights about the crypto market.
I think, well, this work is a very old work, and it's sort of the first iterations of it started in 2016. And to me at the time, I was like very interested in just simply these like pressures that sort of shape us as we go about our normal lives, and which, to a large extent go unthought about, certainly unseen. And to render those with a body sort of made sense. So the Familiar really are an attempt to like render this pre-existing relationship. Yeah, and NFTs I think provided the perfect opportunity for that.
Yeah, totally. Why, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about why NFTs and why now, and what kind of insights did you want to reveal about these networks?
Well, I think it's more that it's not so much why NFTs, why now, more like the technology facilitated the idea that like before it really wasn't possible, not only just on a technological perspective, but simply on a sort of cultural and community perspective, that like there's a culture that's built up around NFTs, in which people are coming together around projects, interacting, kind of furthering and growing them through their interactions. And I think so the technology and the community aspect sort of suddenly make the initial Familiar idea possible. Like suddenly the fiction can become a reality. And secondly is that the crypto communities themselves are emotionally more than most tied to their investments, um, to the NFTs that they hold. And I think, Ian's work speaks to that as well. Yeah, and so it seems literally like the perfect sort of context to see this idea.
Ian, do you feel is that something that you can relate to, that you feel similarly? Kind of this also being one of your early kind of forays into the NFT space, and also in terms of the kind of portraits that Three Face are casting of individuals and their emotions in this tumultuous environment.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I share a kind of similarity with Ed in that many aspects of Three Face, this project, while it's centered in an NFT idiom right now, come from earlier work. And I've always been in my work obsessed with a person's psychology, and especially this Jungian idea that we are composed of multiple sub-personalities, and that accounts for a lot of our contradictory and paradoxical behavior. When your friend or your child or your dog, or your spouse, have inconsistent behavior, it's not that their expectation of them should be that they should be consistent. It's that they're actually composed of, there's like multiple beings inside of them being called to action. And so I really want to explore that further in Three Face. And yeah, I mean, I think as more and more as Ed was saying, as so much of one's emotional life, if you're in the crypto world, is tied to your investments, I thought that would be a pretty rich data source to explore these much older and ancient ideas of how a personality is formed. And on top of that, I became very obsessed with this idea recently, maybe in the last year and a half, of some kind of end game for art, where art actually adapts itself to individual viewers. And so the idea to do a kind of portraiture of the holder, based on their wallet transaction history, felt very quite natural to this trajectory I'm sort of aiming after, which is how to make more and more art that can adapt itself to a viewer.
What is, obviously these two projects break away from normative assumptions of what an NFT can be or how to participate in, a contemporary digital art marketplace. How do I ask this question even? How do you, why is this kind of adaptive and interactive artwork interesting to you? And how did you approach the challenge of creating something that critically engaged with these topics and maintained that level of critical rigor while still being something that was accessible, and understandable to an audience who might not be used to this kind of project emerging in the ecosystem, particularly because they were some of the first, if not the first?
I think it's helpful maybe that we came from a very different space. Like I think this is true maybe for you both, Rosie, and that we come from a very different territory with perhaps a different mindset and way of thinking than others. Obviously there are lots of artists that come from the art world as well, but I don't know. Like I feel that art has this responsibility to expand into a technology and sort of feel out its possibilities. And what is in front of us now is largely untapped. Like I think the possibility space around NFTs feels largely remaining there untouched. I don't know. I don't know where I go with that. Ian, maybe you have something to say.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in general, I think we live in a world that's much more literally a world of variables now, not just in terms of like a programming or computers, like computer programming sense, but in the sense that everything's changing all the time now. What's true north anymore? Like, can any of us plan more than a year in the future with any degree of certainty? There's that aspect, but also just to speak specifically about art, like I think art has a kind of mechanistic hangover in that our classic notion of an artist, which still hangs over, I think, many MFA programs, and I think our common idea of art is that, an artist produces something. When they produce something, it's a finished thing. It's maybe imperfect, or if you're like Jeff Koons, very perfect by design, but it's a finished kind of like off the factory thing, and that's it. It's done. And I think what's so interesting about making art that's adaptive or alive or so engaged with a community, as NFTs increasingly are, is that it's coming from a much more organic metaphor of what producing art and maintaining art and evolving art can be. And obviously in the world of like software engineering, that's for a long time been a metaphor for like, when you release software, new software or apps, you're always dealing with updates. And that's sort of baked into your understanding as both a maker and a user of software. And it's because software is it's fundamentally a system. And when you're dealing with a system, it's like an ecosystem in real life, like an organic ecosystem. Things change, the audience for it changes, the use and behavior around it changes, and so the thing itself, naturally, if it could, should change. And I think just the ease and fluidity and knowledge around how to make NFTs, how to make art now, because it's so easy, I think just the fluidity and dexterity we have now as artists to make art that can change with its audience and can react to the world at large is sort of a natural evolution of art to me.
Absolutely. And I think that, as someone who's worked in, the gallery space in the more traditional art world, and like, really thinking one thing that's really exciting about, this moment is that people are living with their artwork. They're living with their digital art on their computers and their phones as their profile pictures. And they're becoming meaningful parts of people's day-to-day lives, which I think is something that at least, a lot of us in the new media art world, have been advocating for decades.
Yeah, I feel that like now the reality is coming forth that like a lot of us had dreamed of many years ago, who were like engaging perhaps in like a post-internet moment or just a digital art moment, and actually seeing also just not just the technology being there, but also like the attention and focus, because I know, for instance, I was making a lot of work with Facebook like many years ago, which also allows for this like dynamic fluidity, this like capturing this ongoing, moving, performative aspect that I think is very much what the internet is. Like it has never been this static object that can just be rendered. It's something that has to be inhabited. And obviously there are various ways and strategies you can use to to capture those mutations and that growth.
And I also think that in the context of technologies like DALL-E or Midjourney that, allow the user slash creator slash viewer to, activate a mode of creation so instantaneously that it's something that is connected to the user and that like has its own kind of independent like mode or methodology for change is really exciting, and I think kind of shows a kind of staying power, lasting power beyond some of the ways that AI have been used in making. And I don't know, Ian, how I know in past spaces you've talked a little bit about DALL-E and AI image making technologies, but I'm wondering how if you could speak a little bit more on this relationship between like this idea of an adaptive NFT that is connected to the owner, and these other kinds of image making technologies, because you're obviously implying AI of your own in your work.
Yeah, I mean, well, just to speak briefly about like all these new AI models that can do text image. I mean, just to zoom out for a sec. I mean, it's just amazing. I don't know. I feel like every week now we're seeing a new advance in like a new diffusion model, or I saw just like maybe yesterday, like text to like video or text to 3D model. Or I mean, it's just incredible the pace of innovation. And on one hand, I know some people are quite alarmed at the high degree of sampling and uncredited sampling of the data training set from like artists or people who post a lot of their work online. I think that's its own thing, yes. But I also think there's this larger notion that I just think, okay, I have two kids, they're 1 and 3. I think, okay, when they're 15 years old and 17 years old, like, will they be using tools in like their equivalent of Photoshop that are AI enhanced to do, crazier and previously more labor intensive things than I ever could? I think the answer is absolutely yes. Whether there's a more judgment on that, that's its own discussion, but I just think it's now part of our future. And when I think if either my kids have any creative impulse, they will just grow up in a landscape where that's just nature. There's this really great Douglas Adams quote where he says, the technology you're born into feels like nature, and the technology that emerges when you're between the ages of like 15 and 30 is like something you can make a career out of. And then technology that emerges after that, it feels like the end of the world and apocalyptic. And I feel like there's a kind of reaction to AI-based image making that's a little bit apocalyptic from people above a certain age. And I just think like anyone younger than that, they're just going to think this is the coolest thing. And the landscape, it means also that the bar for what it means to do artistic, meaningful work that has nerve, that takes risk, and has imagination will just be higher. Like it'll just be higher and more interesting. And yeah, people, the artists that we'll look to in 20, 30 years, they'll just have much stronger nerves and much bigger imaginations, I think, because of these tools.
It's honestly super interesting. And what you said, Ian, like my mom is horrified of DALL-E. She thinks it's like terrifying. She hates looking at the images. And she reads all these scary articles about how it's like the end of culture. And so it's certainly so true, and we're seeing it. And Ed, like familiar is something that is obviously continuing to evolve, is still in early phases, and will hopefully, I mean, I'm just based on your roadmap and all of the things that you've said about the project, it's obviously continuing into a lot of different directions. And so as the context of technology changes, how do you approach the development of familiar and keeping it, keeping the project something that I don't want to say relevant, but that continues to critically engage with the context that it may find itself in 20 years down the line?
That is a very, very good question. Yeah, and what has been created, it is a sort of conceptual artwork that's run amok. Like there is this sense of momentum and agency around the project that goes way beyond me. And actually, when you guys were talking about AI and DALL-E and stuff, that I was thinking there's this great sense of art in general having more autonomy than ever before, separate from the person or group of people who created it. And I think that's actually true of the thinking of the Familiar, where they are their own entities. They have their own agency, and they're very separate from me. In terms of how they will grow, I think we're we feel that like everyone in the team has this sense that you know, we're trying to deepen the emotional connection people have with their familiar. And like, how do you do that? You spend time with it. So I think moving forward, what we're interested in is just creating spaces and contexts where people can have meaningful relationships with their familiar, and not only interact with them, but also get the sense of their own agency. Also get the sense that these things are, although they may possess an instance of them, have in a sense like a life, a spirit, that is beyond. And how we figure that out, I think we're just at the moment beginning to feel those things out. How do we create depth? We're just sort of mapping them out in these next few months.
Something also that I think is interesting about both of your projects, and I forgive me if this is like a weird read, but there's almost something nostalgic to both of your projects in terms of the art style and the presentation. I think in the way that your drawings speak to print modes of storytelling, even, and Ed the Fornieles being cute and almost being like some kind of early 2000s video game character, or cartoon. Both. I think it's interesting that both of these projects kind of tap into those feelings, while also being so forward looking at the same time. It's an interesting duality, and I'm wondering how you guys are feeling about this. Also, as both of you are moving onwards in really rich and prolific media art careers, how do how are you both looking backwards and forwards in these projects, and how are you situating yourselves kind of in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, let me think for a sec. Can you repeat the question real quick?
Yeah, I think that
dropped out there.
No, totally. I think that how do you place these projects into the longer lineage of your exhibitive careers and traditional art gallery careers? Not traditional art gallery careers. What I mean to say is, how do you place these new projects that are adapting to new marketplaces and using new technologies within the larger trajectory of the media art work that you've done? For instance, I know that both of you have shown at galleries like Serpentine, and which is obviously a very different kind of presentation and engagement with a collector base or with an audience than a project like this. So I'm trying to I guess take a snapshot of where these projects sit into a longer lineage for both of you.
Oh, sorry. Now I'm catching snippets of what your earlier question. Can you hear me okay? I'm having some technical difficulty.
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Oh yeah, just to quickly address this thing I just heard but caught up about this cartoony aspect, which I love in Ed's work, with also his Fox character, and obviously that's present in my work. I mean, when I look at Familiar and when I think about my own work, when I see a cartoon, like I think of South Park, in the sense that when you look at South Park, obviously the crudeness of South Park signals to you that it's not about a replication of like skilled photographic replication of reality, but actually it's about capturing behavior in the most succinct way. And I always felt that when you kind of emojify a character, when you reduce it down to eyes and the mouth, you make it really, really cute, or you make it really just the expressors that our own nervous systems are highly attuned to. Well, this is a way of getting at, on one hand, of course, making something cute, great, we all love cute things, but it's also getting at behavior. Like, it's clearly, these are works about behavior and not about verisimilitude or kind of high fidelity simulation. It's about kind of capturing behavior. And that's always been, I think, something very present in my work. And I just want to actually react to something that Ed was saying, because I think it's really true, which is that I do also feel this divorcing and this kind of fraying, which is very interesting, of the artist and the artwork. And there's something that strikes me about doing NFT projects where, for example, people ask about roadmaps or what you're doing with the project 10 years from now. And on one hand, these are fair questions, but if I'm brutally honest, as an artist, you're terrified. You're like, oh shit, 10 years from now, like, don't I want to be working on a million other things too? Like, of course, but this brings up an even more interesting, I think, maybe shift, which is, well, I think in a way there's a kind of, well, put it this way. I've been thinking a lot about the idea of worlding. Like, how do you make a world? How do you launch a world? How do you birth one that other people want to inhabit, contribute to, be a part of, find meaning in? But then also part of worlding is how do you exit that, where you leave it autonomous? And I think we can look to the originator of all this stuff that we're talking about, Satoshi Nakamoto. You mean this guy, he, they, she, like this is the artist, the paragon of art, like being an artist, because what Satoshi did, which was so influential, is Satoshi figured out how to exit a project that had enough, that could flourish on its own, that had enough like richness in it, that was so radical, so imaginative, so full of nerve, that not only could other people take it on, but Satoshi, if you can just humor me for a moment, call it Satoshi an artist, could actually exit the project, maybe anonymously still contributing to it, but could formally exit, give over the admin access to the repo of the Bitcoin code base, I forget, to someone else, who then start the Bitcoin Foundation, and just leave, knowing that the child, Bitcoin, and the network it produced, the protocol produced, would just continue to propagate in its influence well beyond Satoshi's death, whether that's a public death or an actual death, who knows? But I find that like both so beautiful and so profound, because it's the prime example of how you start to decenter yourself as an artist. Artists are so full of ego, and up to a certain age, that's maybe a necessary component of just trying to like figure who you are and like express that in as healthy a manner as you can through creative action, rather than like violence or like other more degenerate means. But barring that, like there is a world now where I think artists have more and more capability and tools and a culture to try to decenter themselves, to try to produce things of lasting meaning, and take a little bit of their ego and honestly the burden of thinking about 20-year timelines for projects out of it. I mean, every tech CEO of a startup thinks this way, but secretly I don't know about Zuckerberg, but maybe like most tech CEOs, they don't think they're going to be chained to their company for the rest of their life. They want to make sure, like a child, that it can actually flourish on its own, and they can seed control and governance to other people who might be more equipped to take it forward and evolve it than they themselves. So I think we're in a kind of interesting moment, both obviously in the landscape of technology. This is how it's been for a while, but I think amongst artists, this is maybe a new paradigm to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's so much discussion, particularly in the space right now, around the role of founders and project creators, as opposed to teams. Like it's insane. Also at Outland, releasing our different NFT projects from our own platform. It really takes a whole village, and it really very quickly, even on a labor side, becomes this very decentralized. Obviously, decentralized labor practice as well. And Sam, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, and like how you see the role of artists and founders, going forward, working at, obviously working so closely with Ed on this project.
Yeah, sure. No, I found that incredibly interesting in what you were saying, and rather beautiful. I mean, having been involved in a DAO for the past, very closely involved with a DAO for the past 15 months, and seen the ways in which that we had some kind of leader and some kind of leadership, and at the same time always striving to kind of make that kind of leadership redundant. It speaks very closely to me, that whole idea. I mean, I think the problem that people often make in the crypto space is that they try to kind of, as it were, decenter themselves or decentralize the project too quickly, right? And then you fall into this easy kind of tragedy of the commons situation. And I think in order to get there, I think, Ian, what you're saying is that it takes the work of worlding. It's a long process of creating that kind of environment that can fare for itself, and that people can take over stewardship of eventually. I'm rather interested, though. It's sort of a question I have actually for both Ed and for Ian, because my thoughts really about NFTs in an artistic context recently have been around the potential of the large edition project. And a large edition project, I kind of count, if it's hundreds of pieces or thousands of pieces, both of which Three Face and Fornieles are both large edition projects, and the kind of scale of both production, but also the scale of distribution that kind of size affords, and the way in which the sort of the financial participation of collectors as well in something at that scale. A number of those collectors also breeds a sort of new scale of emotional participation in an artist's work, and therefore sort of a stronger and potentially larger network and a stronger world. And I wondered, I have this view that sort of selling a 10,000 piece collection like Ed has done is less like him selling a sculpture in an edition of 10 or whatever on the traditional art market. It's more like him being a musician and selling an album to his fans, right? But if you see it as an album, or you can also see it as a kind of a piece, it's a piece of the world. It's potentially a piece of his practice, and maybe even an investment in his continued participation in this economy. But I'm wondering whether both Ian, you and Ed, whether you feel as though working on this kind of scale, which is probably quite different to the scale you've normally been working on, sort of commercially, has presented sort of new ideas or felt exciting, and felt for you that it's opened up opportunities to kind of world build in a different way to that which you could have previously. And of course, you could have, and I think the kind of commodity aspect of it, the fact that this really is a commercial change, is probably quite important to that.
I'm just going to jump in there. Yeah, I'm completely in shock about how different it is working with the two. So in the traditional art world, the networks are very small. The amount of collectors that normally can interact with them are tiny, and they're so fragile because of that. And so what you end up doing is you world build for a select few, and often those worlds that are built feel more like theoretical propositions rather than cohesive things that you can live in or that you can participate on a regular basis. And I think that's, often they are crystallized through these static forms, be they paintings or sculptures or perhaps even digital works. Whereas the networks that exist within the NFT world are much more resilient. They're closer to like a crowdfunding situation. They are, I don't know, like that almost like industrialized distribution. That scaling changes it from being a proposition to being something much more like buoyant and real, and like autonomous. And it is incredibly exciting.
Yeah, I'll echo that. It feels so much more real and alive to know that, I got 1,000 true fans out there who really are holding on to it and care about it, want to see what happens to it, and are interested to know how I might evolve it. The stakes are just so much more different than the traditional manner in which my artwork has usually been sold, and also the manner in which I've conceived of my previous artwork, which were much smaller edition sizes for a much smaller audience. And so for me, the sense of aliveness and the sense that I can have this technological surface area to connect with people who are interested or have become interested in my work, this is just, as an artist, it's very enlivening. And so, yeah, I'm very grateful for it. It's very new to me, and I love it.
Not to throw a wrench in the machine, but it also, just feels like a new kind of burden for the artist to feel the need to continue to maintain something over a long period of time and keep it developing versus another project or a one-off work that you can complete and kind of walk away from. There's a greater responsibility, and so how do you balance that or approach that kind of responsibility?
Yeah, I think it's a quote from you. I remember you saying something about the internet being like a garden. It's something that you have to sort of maintain and care for. And I think
Yeah.
you've made works in the past that require that kind of maintenance, that kind of care, and I think so. And also, I've done things with digital feeds, which they break and they die and they get lost, and it's a nightmare. So I think that perhaps you and I have always had that kind of duty of care in our practice.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. It reminds me, the guy who wrote Game of Thrones, what's his name? George R. R. Martin. He was like, "Oh, I love Tolkien, but I have a problem with him, which is, once Aragorn becomes the king and they, vanquish Sauron, well, like that's then what? Like then when he never shows you what happens after like you're on the throne and you have to rule and you have to maintain all of Middle Earth. Like, what are the tax codes? What do you do with all of the refugee orcs? Like, do you just slaughter all the orc babies because everyone just can't stand the orcs because during the finite battle, like that's when they were the enemy, but now that you just have to rule over everyone, like what do you do? It's all these more interesting, complex problems that maybe aren't as hero's journey dramatic and easily encapsulated as like cinematic stories. Maybe they're more like TV stories. But I've always been obsessed with this class of problems, like the kind of the gardening problem. If maybe more classic art is like being an architect, I think what Ed's describing is maybe kind of being more of a gardener. And just to that point, as an artist, I'm one finite human being. I kind of think of it as, I do have to choose my battles correctly. And some are long battles and projects, and some are short and sweet. And I think with like Three Phase, I embarked on it as a kind of a long project. And it's maybe at the exclusion of other long projects. And then maybe I'll have like shorter projects, but I think I have to like, be a gardener and then also satisfy a little bit of the architect in like shorter bursts, but it's sort of a balance. I think all artists have it within them to kind of do both kinds of projects.
Yeah, for me, I think the word that like comes to mind is stewardship, and also speaking to some of the work that different conservationist colleagues of mine, like Regina Harsani, for instance, and the work that they're doing to try to preserve a lot of these, not preserve these materials, but then again, the stewardship of the larger community. And I think it does call for a different and decentralized set of community labor standards and involvement. It takes as Sam knows as well, it takes a whole team, for sure.
Wait, can I just add? I think it's so cool. What I really loved about the Familiar project was how it was your Miro board that you just like opened up the process that you guys were internally engaged in trying to sort out all the many like conceptual and artistic details of the project, but you just made that a part of like something that the community could observe. I found that so. I actually found it really moving. It almost, when I look at it now, it's like people make artist monographs that kind of encapsulate the cherry pick the best of the process of making something. But when I look at your mirror board, it's like you guys already have your making of documentary right there.
The future is the mirror board. Yeah, thank you for saying that. That openness of production, I think, became something that people could like huddle around and see. And it was like really weird to say, like an emotional process, that whole thing, and it did all spill out onto the mirror board and all of the kind of open channels and stuff. And I think it, to a large degree, was one of the things that like cemented a small but sort of quite dedicated community around the project. Yeah, the future's mirror boards.
I also thought that it was quite funny just when you guys were talking about sort of procedural methods and neural networks and also sort of this decentering of the artist, that actually Fornieles as a project and also your project, Ian, is extremely kind of manual in the amount of kind of drawing, for example, that went into, I think, both of them. Certainly in Fornieles, there's whatever, 150 different sort of subtypes, but we only really started using procedural methods right at the very end. Everything else was kind of, either hand modeled or hand drawn or whatever. And there was totally totally kind of like authored and non automated in that sense.
Ian, what was your process like with
Uh,
Three-Face?
I mean, yeah, it's exactly what Sam said. I mean, I drew all this on an iPad with an iPad pencil, and I didn't actually know until having to do this project that you had to actually replace the iPad pen tips. They actually had replacement tips for like when you draw the psychotic amount that I actually had to do. Like I actually wore down the pen tip to a nub, and like my drawing started to suck, and the marks wouldn't hit. I thought my iPad was broken, but I just had to buy new tips. And it's just like this is so crazy to me how much drawing went into it. And in parallel, there are a lot of interesting and fun procedural systems for warping and manipulating SVGs that the team I worked with developed, Cesar and Oren. And that was a lot of fun to develop in parallel, but it's this thing that Sam's saying, which was like, I couldn't enjoy those procedural processes until the very, 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 very end, once I drew like a bajillion assets. And then it was almost like, finally sticking all these like drawings into the procedural oven, and then the oven, like, thankfully, like baking some interesting stuff out of it. But yeah, where procedural systems and, hand authored assets meet, like, it's a tough road, but it's when it works, it's really, really beautiful.
What it reminds me of, you were talking about like the idea of future generations making art, and that they will have this, they'll rely on AI, and it'll be somehow this negotiation between the two. And that was making me think of like the chess computers can beat humans, but humans and chess computers working together can beat a computer. And I think there's something nice about like mixing those processes, that it is quite compelling and quite powerful when it does
Yeah,
work.
yeah, yeah. They call those chess players, I think, centaur like chess players, right? So maybe there's gonna be like centaur artists, like half horse, half human, like half machine, half human artists.
I love that idea, and I have my brain is getting twisted into a pretzel, also trying to picture it. We have about 15 minutes left in the space. I just wanted to offer an opportunity for anybody in the audience to raise their hand and come ask a question and join the conversation. We would love to hear from you. If any, particularly on this idea of stewardship and the role of the artist in projects that require longevity and care over a long period of time. I think that, I would like to also, a question that I always like to ask, particularly for artists who are, have not been releasing a crazy amount of projects over for a long time. What has been surprising to you, or what has, kind of maybe changed your mind, or been unexpected as you've gone through the releases for both Familiar and Three-Face?
That surprised me. I mean, honestly, like the idea of working with new primitives and starting with that, like, it surprised me internally, like in my own mind, how that I was able to jump into something like with such radically new primitives. I don't want to paint myself as that old. I'm 38, but I am above Douglas Adams, 35 cutoff of new technologies. And I can know in my bones when when I see a new VR demo, part of me is like, the child in me, when it's a good demo, is like, oh, this is so amazing. It's gonna be so cool. But like the adult in me is like, oh, this looks so tacky. I didn't think that about crypto, but I did feel like, oh, there's so much to learn here. There's so much financial literacy to learn. There's like so much of a new culture that's emerging to learn. And what surprised me was in myself was like forestalling that part of me that wants to like just turn away from new things, and actually reactivating this child in me that just like wants to jump into it. This is a brand new sandbox with new toys, new behaviors, new rules, and sky's the limit here. And so for me, like listening to that like inner child at a time when I was having my own children, like really surprised me, and I'm glad it's still alive. And I really do thank Outland for kind of bringing that out of me.
I would really I agree with you on that front, that like that need for like willingness or childishness to sort of begin playing. And I think that's what crypto is at its best. It's an imaginarium. The actual underlying technology doesn't, a lot of the stuff could be made in other ways, or at least aspects of it could be sort of enacted in other ways. But it's a mixture. It's like heady mixture of like community and imagination, and it's the community that then facilitates this imaginarium to become somehow a reality. Like I think that's what's really compelling and what was surprising to me. Like I know, yeah, suddenly this thing is very real, and it's because of a few thousand people who believe in something. It's fascinating.
Wow. I mean, I love what you just said, Ed. The a heady mixture. I wrote this down. A heady mixture of community and imagination. That's beautiful. I'm super thrilled to welcome to the stage Charles. Welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, yeah, nice to hear everyone. I missed part of. I had to walk away for a bit, so I'm sorry if this is already discussed. But Wade, your question about stewardship got me thinking about a recent talk between Tina Rivers Ryan and Casey Rees at the Albright Knox Museum, I think like maybe a week ago. And one of the questions that was brought up was cross-chain migration. And so I'm wondering if that's something that, is being considered or thought about for like Three Face and Finular and whether or not, if it hasn't yet been discussed, what is this potential future of cross-chain migration of these artworks, if there is a future in the artist mind?
I mean, I'll be brutally honest. I have not thought about cross-chain migration. I guess I assumed that by putting these artworks on the Ethereum network that it's a bet, as with all bets, that it would have longevity because enough people have interest and belief in the Ethereum network. But as in my other work, my simulation works, as I delve more and more into how to integrate interoperable assets into my simulations, I'm starting to think much more about like layer 2 chains, things like Polygon, or things that have a little bit more fluidity and speed.
For me, I think the Finilia, they really want to exist in many different places, and if you talk to them, they're always wanting to go to other chains, but we haven't quite found a way for them to do that yet. But yeah, I mean, I think it would be fun to start experimenting with that stuff. But at the moment, we're quite invested in Ethereum as a network.
Thanks.
That's a good question, and a tough one too. I need to that would just be an interesting one. I don't know if we've even talked about that too much internally with the Outland team. Maybe definitely definitely want to bring up. Hey Brian, thanks for joining us as well.
Hi.
Hey.
Yeah, I had a question. I mean, I think it's really interesting that both of these projects, through their use of these adaptive technologies, are kind of giving life to the works or the characters or the tokens or whatever you would call them. Both, the way Three Faces described in the OpenSea metadata, it's sort of like imbuing personalities to these demons. And then the familiar are each they are sort of treated as living, changing things, which, I mean, like, to me, and I kind of wrote about this in my essay for Outland on Ian's piece, but I kind of feel like this is related to the kind of magical thinking or superstition that exists in the crypto space, where there is so much speculation and uncertainty. And I was wondering if either of you wanted to speak to that and how that sort of informed your conception of these projects.
Do you mean kind of centering these projects on characters?
Yeah, or I mean, maybe even I know for you, Anne, this idea of the demon was really important. It's something that you came up in your work through Bob, and thinking in general about AI and how this is imagined as a sort of non-human intelligence, and the connections of that to like myth and other sort of pre-technological ideas or attitudes.
Yeah, I mean, the word demon is a very interesting word because it, well, maybe I'll put it another way. Like, outside of like SimCity and The Sims, like, I don't think as a child, like, I had any interest in systems. You know, even the word system just sounds like completely boring, right? And I don't think the human mind is actually well adapted to thinking about complex systems, except in the case of when it comes to social systems and people or creatures. Like, I don't know about you, but I can remember, like, I don't know, every Game of Thrones character, and they're not even real people, and I barely know them, right? But somehow, like, I think we're very well adapted to the complexity of social structure, families, animals. And so I think for me, the use of the demon as a persisting kind of motif in my work, the idea that, you know, in case of Bob, that Bob is composed of a bunch of sub-personalities of demons. I call it like a congress of demons that are vying for control of Bob's body. Or in the case of Three Phase, that you're there's three demons inside of you. They're your nature demon, your nurture demon, your posture demon. They're vying for kind of internal homeostasis inside of you too. I just think it's a portal for someone interested in the artwork to get to complexity. For me, it's a technique in a way, and it's a technique that I myself personally respond to, and I think most people do as well, in terms of getting to ideas of complexity in systems in the most natural, unconscious way possible.
Yeah, I think that the world used to be made up of spirits which were connected to these large systems that surrounded us, like weather systems, seasons changing, ailments, things that internally happening in the body, and they were narratives and characterizations that gave a logic to how things interacted. And I think that there's something similar going on here with Web3 in these projects and potentially further afield, whereby, yeah, like it's rendering it visible. And also, it made me think of the Jungian stuff again. I think that psychotherapy also provides narratives for understanding these sort of psychic systems that inhabit us or something, or we are. Yeah, I really like this idea of magical thinking related to crypto.
It's interesting, the way that I forget who. Oh gosh, who has the quote that says that any new technology is indistinguishable from magic, or something along those lines. And
maybe Arthur C. Clarke. Maybe.
Yes, thank you, Ian. My name recalled, my lord. And I think that in a lot of cases, particularly, Ed, were talking about, the heady mixture of community and imagination kind of creating a sort of magic amongst the community. It really does feel like that. And the energy is so palpable. It's really cool. We're kind of rounding out at the hour. If anybody wants to ask another question, raise your hand right now. Otherwise, I think we'll bring it to a close today. Thank you so much to Sam, Ian, Ed, Charles, and Brian for being here and for asking questions. I'm a huge fan of both of your work and have been for years, and so it's really cool to be able to talk to you both about these projects, which I've seen so much similarity in and connection, and the communities as well. I know there's also some overlap. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's been fun.
Thank you.